This afternoon, I'm in Los Angeles at the lovely home of Denny Haythorn and his wife, Lori Johnson. Denny is Professor Emeritus of Law and the retired Associate Dean for Library and Information Services at Whittier Law School in Costa Mesa, California. Upon the occasion of his retirement in 2015, Denny was honored by the naming of the library at the Haythorn as the Haythorn Law Library. Denny, it is our custom to begin these sessions by asking you a bit about you as a regular person.
Sure.
So could you tell us a little bit about your life, and not only just now, but even when you were younger?
Sure. I was born in Chicago and grew up in the western suburbs. And I've been thinking about this, and I think that my first real experiences in libraries was in junior high school.
Uh-huh.
My junior high school had a library that I found interesting, and there was a small public library that I used to hang out to. So I guess I've been sort of focused on libraries my whole life, and I guess I didn't realize it.
Yeah. Well, of course, when you and I were sort of at that point in life, about the same time, the libraries were very different than they are today.
Right.
All books, and they all smell like books.
No, that's true. That's true. When I was in junior high and high school, I was on the swimming team and sort of thought I'd be moving in that direction. But for some reason, I decided when I went to college that I wasn't going to be swimming any longer, and thought I would spend more time studying and sort of moving, sort of focusing on that. I went to school in a small school in Indiana, DePaul, and my cousins. I had two cousins who'd been there, and so it's sort of a family school, and it was a very nice experience for me. I enjoyed it a lot. Again, I was in a fraternity, and so I spent most of my time studying in the library because studying in the house was not possible.
I would imagine it would be noisy and distractions.
There was too many distractions. Yeah. Sure. So I spent my time at DePaul. It was a double major with history and, well, I tell people I was a double major, female companionship and intoxicating beverages.
But somehow I think maybe that wasn't totally accurate,
well,
since you did add other degrees afterwards.
Yeah. In the summers when I was at school, I worked for a law firm in Chicago first as a messenger. And next summer I worked in the library, and then the last 2 summers I worked in the docket, and so we would do not make appearances, but we go in, file papers, and do that. And I really sort of got involved with law, and thought it was a place that I should go. And so I decided in law school or in college that I wanted to go to law school. So when I got out of, when I was getting ready to graduate, I told my father that thanks for paying for undergraduate school, but now I'd like you to pay for law school. And he said, well, he was going to put my brother, his second son, through college, and so I was on my own.
Uh-huh.
Now, I graduated from college in '69. In '66, I got a draft notice from the Chicago Draft Board.
Uh-huh.
And they
Good
said,
old General Hershey and greetings, huh?
they said, we've drafted everybody in Chicago but you, and you're next. So I went down and joined the Air Force ROTC.
Uh-huh.
And so when I graduated, instead of going to law school, I went in the Air Force. And I had about a month and a half between the time that I graduated and before I went in the service. So I went back to the law firm and worked for a month there. And I talked to some of the partners, and I asked them what I should do. And they said, basically, I should go and be in the service, get out, go to law school, and then come back and talk to them about a job. And I should get out of law school as fast as I could because they felt that the service was a waste of time, and from their point of view, it probably was. So I went to I went in the service, and I was assigned to North Dakota to a missile launch crew.
Oh.
So I spent 2 winters in North Dakota waiting for World War III. And I was such a deterrent that they moved me to Vandenberg, which is on the coast of California, north of Santa Barbara,
Uh-huh.
to train people how to wait for World War III.
Mm-hmm.
So that was much better assignment.
The winters are better, I'll bet.
Yeah, they certainly are. So I went to, when I was getting out of the service, or separated from the service, first of all, my commander said that I was crazy to leave, that I would have a great future in the military. And I said, "You're going to send me back to North Dakota?" And he said, "Oh yes, you'll have it." So I'm not doing that.
The end of that idea, huh?
So I applied at several law schools on the West Coast, and I decided, because I wanted to stay on the West Coast, and I ended up getting in a couple, and I ended up going to the University of Puget Sound, which became Seattle Law School.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I went to Puget Sound was that they had a 2-year program. So you were able to graduate with a law degree doing 90 semester units in 2 years. So it was a true trimester with a 15-week summer school. And so I entered law school in August, and I went all those 6 semesters, and ended up graduating in August of, so I entered in 93, graduated in 95. And when I was in law school, I had thought about where I wanted to work and what I'd want to do. And so I called the people in Chicago, and I flew back there, and I had interviews with 3 firms.
Yeah.
And I'd really become accustomed to the West Coast, and I was thinking more of living out here. And the salt on the streets in January had eaten all the polish off my shoes. I was exhausted. And so I was at my final interview in Chicago. I was with a big fancy white shoes law firm up in the Sears Tower. And I was probably on the 80th floor looking out at the streets, the people leaving the city on a Friday night. And it was about 7 o'clock at night. And you could see the taillights of the cars leaving. And this guy, who was his partner, turned, I was in his office and said, "No, why do you want to work for this firm?" And I said, "I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to work for this firm." And I said, "I'm going." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go back to Seattle, and I think I really like the people in the law library, and I've been talking to them about careers in librarianship." And it was Anita Steele and some of her younger librarians. And I said, "I think I'm going to try that." And he looked at me, and I thought, "Man, I've just wasted this guy's time. He's going to be really angry." And he looked at me and said, "Young man, I wish I had the courage of your convictions when I was your age." And I thought, you want me to be you, and you don't like you. So I went back to Seattle, went back to Puget Sound, finished up, and I went to talk to the people at UW, and I met Marion, and Anita said, "You got to go talk to Marion." So I went down and I said, "Well, I'd like to think about the law librarianship program." And they said, "Well, that's fine, but first you have to." And by then I had a beard and kind of scraggly hair. And I said, I guess I've already graduated from undergraduate school, and in the meantime, when I was in the service, I got a master's in history from Chapman, because I wanted something more to do. And so they said, "Well, then you have to have a degree, you have to have a language." And I said, "Well, I did that in undergraduate school, I've got proficiency, that's all right." And it was like they were trying to keep me out.
Oh.
So, not Marion, but the library school. So I said, "Well, I'm not graduating until August." And they said, "Well, the program begins in, I think, May or June." And so
That's right, with the so-called preliminary courses.
Yeah. So you can't do it. I thought, "Oh, that's okay." So
You can if you don't mind sitting around another year.
well, that's true. So I went back to meet with Marion,
Yeah.
and she said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Didn't go very well." She said, "You get back there and you tell them, because you can take those courses anytime." So I know, okay. So I walked back across campus from the old law school back to the library school in the old Sazala library. And I said, by the time I got back, the dean was out willing to, anxious, pumping my hand, glad to see me. Yes, we can work this out. It's not going to be a problem. Everything will be fine. And I could take the courses in Tacoma at the University of Puget Sound.
All the better. You were living in Steilacoom at
I was
that
living in
time?
Steilacoom.
Yeah, down
south
of Tacoma.
Tacoma. So I could take my program at UPS while I was doing my law degree. So between 73 to 75, I got my law degree and the prerequisites I needed for the library school program.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going up to the library school program, and I was commuting from Tacoma, which was a long drive,
Mm-hmm.
but it was doable. And so I managed to get in the program. I was a semester or quarter behind everybody else, but I worked out getting in the program. It was a really nice program, and Marion was such a wonderful person, so encouraging, and like probably all the people you're talking to who went there were she just was a fabulous person,
Yeah.
and really formed my sort of view of law librarianship.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished up I started going at the University of Washington, and I thought, well, when I was in law school, I used to take notes, type up my notes back when they had typewriters, and really, I decided to work hard in law school so I'd do well. And so I used those same techniques in library school.
Mm-hmm.
And after a quarter, some of my friends came to me and said, "Look, you got to back off. You're ruining the curve for the rest of us." I said, "Okay, sorry." And so I decided that I would take the bar in Washington.
Okay.
So while I'm in library school, commuting from Tacoma, I was studying for the bar. Took it in February, I guess.
Okay.
Found out I passed the bar before I graduated from library school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm now thinking about what I'm going to do with where I go to work. And so we came up to my last quarter, and I was assigned to, or we were assigned to have an internship or an externship with somebody. And I got the feeling that they wanted us to go away. So I went to the University of Denver to work with Al Coco, and that was a formative experience too. And I really wanted to go to Denver because he was the only other person who was offering a joint degree at the time.
That's right. He modeled it after Marion's program, but with more practicum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I remember we did courses on packing boxes of books and yeah, I mean
that's what you do sometimes.
They were all things we used, and so he had me. It was when the Denver Law School was downtown, and before it had moved, and I had just a wonderful time with Al and in Denver, and it was I got to see sort of a different side of the profession. Miriam was all about the business and all about doing things the right way and doing things with style and sort of reserve. And Al was not like that. Al was fun. He was interesting. He was. We had some interesting times. When I was working there, we had somebody was going through the state statutes, marking out all the words in the indexes that uses the word insanity.
Okay.
And so Al said, "Well, we'll just whoever this person is, they're going alphabetically, so we'll just stake out the next one." And so the library staff around the clock watched whatever statue was up next. And it wasn't me, but we caught the person who was doing it. And, he would come up with interesting, ideas and ways to do things. So I finished up with Al, moved back to Seattle.
Yeah.
Or
So you were with Al just a few weeks or
Oh, I think
longer?
it was a month or 6 weeks.
Okay, because you were on sort of field work, as I recall.
That was the field work, yeah.
Yeah, so that's 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You apparently picked up a few tidbits of information while you were there. Doesn't surprise me one bit.
No, he was an interesting guy and someone who I grew to rely on really my whole career. And I'm going to circle back around because I got back in touch with him in Denver. So we had this really nice experience in Denver, and I went back to Seattle, and we started looking at jobs, and there were a number of jobs that I was looking at, and the two I was most attracted to were one was in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Okay.
At the time, the Bar Association had the lawyers paid into their trust accounts paid to the banks. The interest went to the banks, and the Law Association changed. So that interest money would go to the Bar Association. So suddenly they were awash in cash, and so they decided to expand out their library and their library services, and they were going to have branch libraries throughout the province, all connected by computer. I mean, it was very interesting. And I flew out there. They were just the nicest people. They could not have been more friendly, more helpful. I said, I've just passed the bar in Washington, and I hate to give that up, but I can't practice here because I'm not a citizen. And they said, don't worry, we can change the law, we can fix it, we can put a special okay. And they said, and here's how much money we're going to pay you, and it was more money than I'd ever made, and so I was pretty excited. Yeah. And I went back to Seattle, and then the other job I looked at was the job at Whittier. And I flew down to Whittier, and it was Whittier was just starting. The college had just purchased, or just taken over, they didn't buy, a nonprofit, state-approved school. And they had a small commercial building they were operating out of. And they had bought this larger, old girls' private school. And they wanted someone to build the library from scratch. And I thought that would be really interesting. So I went back, and the dean was a really interesting guy, very, not ambitious, but very forward-thinking, and had good ideas. And he told me, we need to have this library, I don't care how much it costs. And those were sort of, really, that's going to be fun. And I went back to Seattle, and I talked to Marion, and I said, I've got 2 career opportunities. I've got offers from 2 great places. The one in Regina and the one in Los Angeles. The problem with the one in Regina is I've already lived in North Dakota, and I don't think I want to live up where it's so cold again.
Even your experience in Chicago, as I recall, was a little colder than you liked.
Yeah, it was cold in Chicago too. So
Los Angeles won out?
Well, so I called the people in Regina, and they said, the guy thought about it for just a moment and said, well, I'll give you 25% more money, and we'll buy you a car. I thought, you're making this easier.
He didn't promise to change the winter climate.
No, he didn't.
Didn't go that far.
And he was so nice, and the people were so great. But I just decided I'd rather come to Los Angeles, and so I came back to Seattle, and I talked to Marion. Said, I want to go to this Whittier thing, but I really don't know much. Everybody else in this program goes and gets a job as a reference librarian. Then they go and get a job as an associate director, and then they get a job as a director. And I'm skipping all that, and I'm nervous about that. I've got to hire all those people. And
you hadn't had that experience under Al, Coco, or Marion, huh?
And And Marion said, look, they're asking you to do this. You know more than they do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just get out there and do it. So I went and I accepted the job at
Well, you weren't the only graduate of our program in that era who walked into a directorship or whatever the title was at the time. But
yeah,
not all of us. Some of us went into a subordinate position for very short years. But
well, the problem with making that transition is you don't really have mentors. You don't have people you worked with,
Yeah. Well, you had a couple at least.
I did.
I assume if we were counting mentors, you'd certainly put Al and Marion Gallagher and Al Coco rather.
That's certainly true.
What about Anita Steele?
Yeah, Anita was sort of an enigma. She was. There were a lot of people from Puget Sound who went into the library program.
Yeah.
And Sally Wise and just.
Yeah, our profession is peppered with them,
Yeah,
shall we say. Yeah.
So there's a lot of dual degree people from following the same track.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is one of the disadvantages of skipping those steps. But if you look at my career, you know, I did a law school program and a library school program and got a law degree in 3 years.
Yeah.
So I thought, what can possibly go wrong? And so I moved down to Seattle. I had been dating my wife, at the time we'd been dating, and I went to her and I said, look, I know your goal is to go to the University of Washington and get an MBA. She was early on in computers, and she was right on the ground floor of the shared processing. And I said, I'm going to move to LA. I'd like you to come with me.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, I'll drive down with you, and then we'll see. So she drove down. We spent some time here, and then she flew back to Tacoma, and I thought, oh man, I hope I see her again. And then sure enough, she decided to move down, so that was nice. Mm. And she was able to translate her work in Tacoma into a similar program here in
well, there are a lot of excellent schools in this region.
well, no, she never went back to school.
So she never went back
No.
into college or university?
No, she went, she graduated from the University of Oregon. She's Phi Beta Kappa. She's the brains of the outfit.
Okay.
So whatever she does, if it tells me to do, I do, because she's probably right. Mm-hmm. No, she got into shared processing in healthcare.
Oh.
And they flew her back. She spent, it must have been 3 months training back in King of Prussia for this shared. And so at the time, computers were brand new, and shared processing was brand new. And they would ship tapes back and forth across the country. There wasn't, I don't even think FedEx existed. They were giving airline pilots, in the early 70s, they were giving airline pilots.
UPS was still delivering locally for department stores.
Right. So they were batch filing, and it was a wild.
And you didn't have anything like we call the internet today.
No.
I mean, they were beginning to lace things together, but it hadn't happened yet.
It's always been funny talking to students, and I'll say, you know, they'll ask why do you have to post something in the Wall Street Journal before you can trade on it? Mm-hmm. I said that's because there didn't used to be instantaneous communication. We used to not that wasn't possible. Mm-hmm. So we came down here and we started working on the library, and so Whittier wanted to become an AVA approved school. Mm-hmm. So while I didn't actually have a mentor that I worked with, turns out that the law library community here in Los Angeles was really strong. And so my mentors here were Al Brecht and Fred Smith.
All right.
And they could not have been nicer. UCLA and
USC.
They could not have been nicer.
Uh-huh.
And they were helpful. They were glad to talk to me on the phone. I used to go and visit with Fred at UCLA, and I taught at the library school program at UCLA, taught law library administration. Mm-hmm. So I would see Fred, a couple times a month, and talked to Al on the phone.
Yeah.
And
Albert was a protege of Coco's as well.
right,
Yeah, he
Right.
started off as a law student at the University of
In
Houston when Al was there.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then he moved up into USC pretty quickly too.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, he was the director there.
he was the associate director, and then
Yeah, was that his first job out of school?
I think it
there?
was
I
the
think it
first-
was.
yeah.
I can't remember that he was anyplace else.
no, I think he was there the whole time.
Yeah, Riley Paul Burton was his
Right.
director at the time,
Mhm.
and then he retired.
Right.
Yeah,
And then-
Albert was moved up.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. So those two people really became my mentors here. So even though I didn't work for them,
Uh-huh.
I certainly got to know them. And then because we were ABA, looking for ABA approval, and because at the time the ABA said you have to have these things, and you have to do this. And so it was easy to know what the requirements were. And since
Mhm.
Whittier wasn't imposing any monetary limitations on me, I began working with Dick Spinelli
Mhm.
and Paul Rothman to collect the materials we would need and build out the collection. And so we would be inspected, and my inspectors were Barty Wolf, Roger Jacobs,
Yeah.
and a few others. And
Good,
so those two-
solid colleagues that knew
Yeah.
what they were looking at, and fortunately were sensible too.
yeah. So those guys became my mentors as well. So
Uh-huh.
I started to so I didn't have anybody I worked for as a mentor, but I had these people who came once a year.
Mhm.
Sometimes we would get consultants that would come in, and it was really nice, and I could really feel the community.
Mhm.
And then the national meetings were nice too. Now, the first national meeting I sort of went to was in Boston. It was the year I went down, and I just started working at Whittier, and I didn't know very many people,
Mhm.
and I talked to Penny Hazelton, who was one of my classmates,
Yeah.
and she said, "Well, I'm now living outside of Boston. You can come and stay with us."
Was she up in? I thought she was
No,
up in Portland. Now, that's a
was-
ways out.
She was in Portland, but her husband and she were staying. He was in the Air Force
Oh,
at Hampton Field.
so she was commuting north to Maine from someplace.
Well, yeah, off and on weekends. So
Yeah.
so she was staying at home for the convention. So I flew out from Seattle to because I just started gotten a job. So I flew through Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And the plane was late, and it was late, and it was late. And two of the people I worked with at Denver were on the flight with me. And we got in at 2 in the morning to Boston. And I thought, well, I just can't call Penny. I mean, it's too late. And so Al's assistant, Sue Weinstein, and his cataloger, Barb, I can't remember her name, said, well, you can stay with us.
Fine.
And so I thought, what? Okay. So they called the hotel, they got a rollaway bed, put it in the room,
Mm-hmm.
went down. And so the next morning was the Miriam Gallagher breakfast.
All right.
And when I got in, Sue called Al, said I was staying with them and I'd be down in the morning. Well, I slept in. And so Al got up at the first meeting and said, I'd like to introduce the person who did the internship with me, but he's shacked up with my assistant and my cataloger. So,
That's Al.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also got to know Mark Estes.
Oh,
Because
right,
He was part of the
Mhm.
COCO program. In fact, I sat at his desk. He'd been injured in a biking accident. And so he was on some kind of medical leave.
That was an interesting meeting. You probably went to that thing where we went to the Boston Pops one
Mhm.
night.
I did. It was,
Fiedler was still performing, and a superstar in the organ field at that time, E. Power Biggs, was our organist. He was in town for some
Oh.
other reason, and they performed
probably-
an organ concert in part. And,
Mhm.
yeah, I remember looking up around that place, and had grown up in a more conservative environment, all these naked statues up there on the wall in
Oh,
that
yeah,
place.
well,
That was a little different.
Yeah, I think one of the highlights of the profession are those summer meetings.
Yeah.
And I found that the best part of the meeting was getting to know my colleagues.
Yeah. There was a lot of social interaction at night, I remember, and it was a much smaller group of people got together. I mean,
It was. Yeah.
Some years later when we grew to over 5,000 people, and
Right.
maybe had 2,500 at the annual meeting. It was still like 500 or 600 in those
Right.
days.
Right. Yeah, and it was it was easy to talk to people. People were supportive. The profession, to me, the profession was always supportive,
Mm-hmm.
and the people we met were, interested in promoting the profession, not protecting it exactly. So.
Well, you have. It sounds like you've had sort of an interesting life all the way along, and sort of a one place too. Although it's not as cold as it could be up in Saskatchewan.
No, I didn't. My goal when I moved to Los Angeles was to be here 2 years,
Uh-huh.
because I thought that we were spending money so fast that I thought 2 years and I'll have to get a real job.
Mm-hmm.
And
Why is it? Did you run out of money or out of ideas on how to spend it?
no, that was never going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But while I was here, I got a letter from the Air Force,
Uh-huh.
and they said that when you get a commission in the service, you have 29 years to get 20 good years, so you can retire.
Mhm.
Now they've changed that a little bit, but
Okay.
you need 20 years and 29 years, and I had the years I was in library school and law school, and then a couple of years at Whittier, and so they said, unless you get into the reserves, you're gonna be out of the service. And I thought, I've always felt that if you never put all your eggs in one basket. You should be flexible and have choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that the older I got, the fewer my choices would be.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'll see if I can get back in the reserves. And so I went down to I met a guy at March Air Force Base who was the JAG officer, and he said, "Oh yeah, we can use somebody like with your talent. So we need research people. You'd be great." So I started back in the service, and I started doing sort of simple. I didn't do court martials, but I did contracting and other.
Probably beat sitting in a missile silo during
It did indeed.
the winter streaming up above you with the weather.
Well,
terribly cold.
sitting in the missile silo wasn't so bad. It was getting to and from that was
Yes.
the bad part. And we used to ride in helicopters. I hated that.
Oh.
The helicopter pilots were a nervous group because they would rotate 89 days to Vietnam and then back.
Oh.
And so they would fly very high and then drop out of the sky to the landing pad. And
The old habits.
And yeah.
Keep the snipers from getting
Right.
them.
And the same way with taking off, they wind up anyway. So I got back in the service and I started doing my reserve work at Marsh Air
Mhm.
Base here, which is in Riverside, it's commutable, or it was
Yeah.
commutable then.
Okay.
Not today, but
A little more traffic here today. Yeah.
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 And so I went to, they have these surveys of the law where the lawyers would get together.
Mhm.
I went to the JAG school to learn the Air Force way of doing things, and then went to this survey of the law, and I met a group who was doing legal research. And it was called Flight.
Mm.
And it was an Air Force program that had civilians and Air Force people working in doing legal research.
Mhm.
And what they'd done is in Denver, at the Air Force Finance Center, they were using the mainframe computer in the evenings when the Finance Center wasn't using it. So I switched, I transferred to work for Flight, and these guys, we would get calls during the day. So on weekends I'd fly to Denver, and on my 2-week tours, and sometimes I do two-week tours a year, sit in Denver in an office, and I take calls from people who needed legal research.
Mm-hmm.
And we would describe the research, and then we would send we'd send the batch file, we'd code it up we code it up, give it to programmers, they'd run a search overnight, we'd get the printout the next morning, we'd call the people with the results. And so it was an early online, semi-online legal research. And I did that for a couple of years, until they finally started, and it was before Lexis or Westlaw.
Okay. This is fairly early, the late 70s still,
70s.
or?
No, late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, well, that's about the time Lexis and Westlaw were getting launched.
Right. Yeah, they had, Justice Department had Juris.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first one.
Yeah,
And then OBAR started with the
Yeah.
Ohio Bar.
in Ohio, yeah, that
And
became Lexis,
Lexis.
yeah, or the
And-
basis for that.
And Flight had started after OBAR, but before OBAR became Lexis.
Mm-hmm.
And then West, who said, we don't need this computer stuff, said, wait a minute, we better do something about this. And so I've been,
Well, they were looking at what Lexis was up to, which
Yeah.
is suddenly the West had a competitor putting out full text opinions.
well, you know, West always had a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
The West, when they were when the West brothers were, you know, starting from Westlaw, or the West from their stationery business, had built on American legal paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
Can't trust anybody. You can only trust you can only trust yourself. And Bancroft was, don't worry, we'll give you what you need. And it was an entirely different philosophy.
That's right, and that continued up until Bancroft Whitney and Lawyers Co-op that sort of merged with them.
Right.
Basically all got acquired by the company that acquired West.
Right.
So they're all one big happy family now,
Yeah.
or at least a family.
They're a family. I don't know if I call it happy.
Yeah.
I had a sabbatical one semester, and one semester I had a sabbatical, and my research project was English legal publishing.
Okay.
So I went to London, and I made some contacts with some of the law librarians in London,
Mm-hmm.
and through them, they got me in contact with some of the publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to meet the Bancroft, or not the Bancroft, but the Butterworth publisher or editors.
Yeah.
And the friend I had knew one of the editors who did commercial law.
Okay.
So I made an appointment to see him, and I went. I had an appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning. Get on the tube, go across London,
Mhm.
leave Laurie, and I'd taken the boys too. And they going to meet this guy, and so I show up and see his secretary, and she goes, "What time did he tell you to be here?" And I said, "Well, they said 10." She goes, "Why don't you come back in an hour?" So I thought, "Oh, all right." So I went away. I came back in an hour, and he just got to work. And he said, yeah, sit down, we'll talk about this now. What is your question? I said, well, how do you decide what to put in your reporter? He said, oh, I read everything. It's a small country.
Yeah.
I read everything.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you put in? He said, well, I put in things that I think are important. And I said, that's good enough for the judges? And he said, oh yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, how do you know nothing's important if it's a change? And he said, well, I read everything and I look at it, and if the court is going in a different direction, then I will know that that's what's going to happen. And I said, well, you won't really know until you see the second one then. Because if the first one just could be a noise, you don't know if it's a signal. So he said, well, I read everything. So if I see the first one and then I read it, someone else who's relied on the similar kind of argument, then I'll know that this is where the law is going. I said, well, then
Does he put that in?
I said, which do you publish? Do you publish the first one that led it, or the second one that sort of confirmed it? He says, oh, I put in the first one. I said, well, they could be years different. He goes, it's England, we don't care. And so I started writing this up, and I said, are lawyers in America going to allow publishers to dictate what they have available?
Mm-hmm.
And it became immediately clear that they're not going to. That was totally off the table.
Mm-hmm.
So but it was an interesting project.
Yeah. Well, of course, Butterworth came over here and opened up a shop, and I guess must have operated differently in this country.
Well, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, they had to respond to. They had to respond to the West American legal paranoia.
Yeah.
Got to have everything.
Well, of course, West sold you everything, the basic cases, and a lot of the others came up with ways to access them more efficiently, or however,
Right. Well,
at least in theory.
yeah, my favorite West reporter was the appendix.
Ah.
And I was at one of the summer meetings
Mm-hmm.
when I saw this volume on the West display. I said, "What's this?" And she said, "Well, this is the unpublished opinions." I said, "It can't possibly be all that." She said, "No, it's the unpublished opinions that we think are important." I said, "Okay."
What happened to this?
So-
you select for yourself. We'll give it all to you.
So I picked up the book, and I opened it up, and it was empty. It was blank.
Uh-huh.
But it was just a model. And I said, "I want this book." She said, "You can't have it." I shined it for my display. I said, "I'm going to, when you turn your back, I'm going to take it." She said, "No, please don't do that. I'll send it to you." I said, all right. And I still have it. She sent it to me. So I have the volume 1 of the West Appendix with nothing in it.
Yeah. You're probably one of the few copies, too.
Probably,
Yeah.
right. Now, while I was at Whittier, I did look at other jobs, and I interviewed at a couple of places. And one of two things happened when I would interview. One is I realized that the life wasn't going to be better if I moved.
Mm-hmm.
And life in Los Angeles was getting pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, they didn't take me seriously.
Oh.
They said, "Why would you leave Los Angeles to come to this part of the country?" And I thought, well, I've already flown across the country. You're paying for this. Why did you do this if you thought I wouldn't be interested? Obviously, I'm interested. And so I think, anyway, I don't know if I.
That's interesting. They must have had so many qualms about wherever it was they were living.
It seemed,
Nobody would want to join them. That's silly.
It seemed odd. One place I interviewed, I was one of the two final candidates. The other was Peter Skank,
Oh,
and he was at Detroit College at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the dean called me and said, "Well, we decided to hire Peter," I said, "He needs a job more than I do." So.
Well, as you say, you were happy. I mean, the place was treating you decently,
Yeah.
and the city was interesting, and
Yeah.
Why move?
Well, plus I was still in the Air Force, and
Well, that may have been a
still
problem
doing
if you were working out here at one of the nearby places.
right,
Yeah.
right. And we had two boys, and they were doing well. And there's when I was growing up in Chicago, we used to spend summers up in Michigan at a lake, and I used to sail up there. And so when I was here, I started sailing again. Actually, I sailed when I was in law school.
Yeah. I
up
noticed a fairly substantial body of water just a little west of here
Yeah,
the
there
other
really
night.
is,
My son and I are traveling on this trip together, and we were over looking at the Malibu area. Yeah.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time sailing. The boys grew up sailing here, and they don't sail now. Really, they can sail, but they both have careers, and they're pretty busy with wives and families and so forth.
It happens.
But sailing was something that really worked out well for me and for them. And I think you become, if you can start sailing when you're young, and it's not expensive. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not like horses or the travel that people do now. But
And you don't have to put if you use just the sails, well, any
Right.
fuel and
There's no
everything,
fuel.
and that's rather pricey.
And the boats were at the time the boats were cheap, or
Oh.
you could borrow them. But you learn to do more than one thing at a time,
Yeah.
and you tend to look out instead of looking inward, and I think it helped with helped with my driving.
Mhm.
So.
Okay. Well, that sort of brings us around to something that we sort of moved past early in my usual
Oh,
array
sorry.
of scripts, and that is asking you if you have any particular hobbies or special passions or other interests that occupy time. You talked
Well-
about sailing and so on.
Well, I
anything
do.
like that, or
I
do you have
do.
any others?
I did say I sailed here. I sailed on a boat, on a race boat for a
Mhm.
while,
Mm-hmm.
and now I do race committee, which is making sure that the racing is fair for all the competitors, and
Okay.
the starts are even. And sailboat racing is like football, except they move the goalposts
Mm.
with the wind, and so you're constantly changing. I love being on the water. It's just there can be moments of anguish, but mostly it's fun and
Mhm.
relaxing. And then I've gotten to know people who have impressive resources and have done some boat deliveries on the East Coast
Mm.
and some boat deliveries on the West Coast. And there's only been a few times when I've laid on the deck crying like a little girl, thinking I was going to die. But well, it's been fun. And so I've been up and down the West Coast from Glacier Bay to La Paz,
Good.
and it's been enjoyable.
Well, Denny, we've just gotten a signal that our meal is about ready. And
Okay.
we probably better come to a conclusion at this point. There are a few things I might ask you if we want to do a little supplement later, but
Well, I think I can wrap this up. I mean, I mean, one of the things that at Whittier, because Whittier was, even though the college the law school was part of the college, we were pretty independent,
mhm.
and we ended up with a couple of overseas programs, and I was able to be the director of our program in Santander, Spain for a couple of
Mhm.
summers, and in Toulouse, France for a couple summers. And then
Nice places to go in the summer, I'll bet.
I searched and helped negotiate the contracts for our
Mhm.
program in Nanjing, China.
Mhm.
And so those have been really great opportunities. At a bigger university, I wouldn't have had those opportunities.
Yeah.
And then I did some teaching, and I taught commercial law, agency, partnership.
Mhm. Yeah, I taught the agency and
Yeah.
partnership for 30 years.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I taught maritime law.
Yeah, I taught that too.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. A lot of librarians I hear have sort of gravitated to that.
Mhm.
And our colleagues, mostly on the faculty, don't know anything about it. So
No, really.
that was nice. They couldn't second guess me.
Almost nobody knows anything about marriage.
Yeah.
Everything, when you go to sea, everything changes.
Yeah. It is such a fascinating
It is.
field, too. I really was so excited. It's so different from
Right,
what we call the common law system
Right.
here. Yeah.
right. Well, you know, it's a body of law that was developed when people didn't know where they were going,
Yeah.
didn't know where they were coming back,
Yeah.
probably didn't speak the same language as the people they're trying to trade with.
Yeah.
And so it was
Yeah.
I thought it was always very interesting.
And it ended up with very sensible, practical solutions to all the sorts of problems
Mhm.
that would occur
Yes.
that needed solutions developed.
Absolutely. And then I also taught aviation, and I got to know
Mhm.
some of the people at Boeing
All right.
and some of the people in Toulouse at Airbus.
Oh.
And Airbus is an interesting story. The Germans and the French couldn't decide what language to use,
Mhm.
so they picked English.
That doesn't sound unforeseeable.
They picked English. So all the documents, all of the meetings, all of the memos, all of the email, everything's in English. So if you
That
go,
is most fascinating, because you would think that would be one they'd keep off the table out of
If-
general
if you
principles.
if you go to well, they didn't want to confusion.
Yeah.
And there have been some problems with translating uh, uh, um, manuals
Mhm.
for the different countries. So you have somebody will be have a manual in English, and it'll be the work is being done in a Spanish-speaking country, and they.
I suppose when you look at the international airline system, English is their standard language,
It is.
sort of the universal language. I've found that traveling in countries where you go into the airport and there's always the English version of all the signs telling you what you're supposed to be going and so on. I found that very convenient.
Well, if you get in the major airports, if you get in some of the
They're the
small,
ones I've been in.
my younger son's father-in-law was a command pilot, a 747 pilot for United, and he said, "It's true, everyone speaks English, but not everyone understands it."
Uh,
So he was always there. He used to
that
fly.
could be a little scary, I guess.
He used to
You're
fly
up
to
there
China.
30,000 feet or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one airport I did visit that was an interesting throwback to its era, and that was in Vilnius in Lithuania, and it was one of the old Soviet airports.
Right.
It did, as you say, was different from,
Yeah.
say, some of the other places over there.
Yeah, the times I've been, the most, well, when I was in college, I did a summer program in Japan,
Uh-huh.
and I thought it was great, but it was, first I thought I would learn Japanese, but nobody wanted to speak to me in Japanese.
Oh.
My Japanese was terrible, and their English was better, and they wanted to practice their English.
Oh, so you
So
didn't
I would
learn
try
any
Japanese, I would-
except that the Japanese themselves were not interested in indulging your need.
And so in my travels in China, I didn't even bother. The
Yeah.
Chinese, they were not interested.
Yeah.
And so, but you can get around in China.
Yeah.
It's just not. Since the Olympics, it's easier.
Mm.
But as soon as you get outside of Beijing or Shanghai, the train stations don't have English, and
Yeah.
the bus stations don't. So it becomes somewhat more daunting.
We talked to some people in Lithuania, and a lot of the people we interacted with spoke very good English.
Yes.
And we asked them, one of the young ones, why do you all learn English? And he said, well, in the era when the Soviets were in charge, we all had to learn, people had to learn Russian. But we actually don't like those people anymore. So we want now to learn another language, and with the European community, at least this was before Brexit, we aspire to end up working in England, and we figured we'll be a lot easier off if we know how to speak that language. It was
Yes.
an interesting comment.
We were in Beijing, and we were staying in one of the government hotels,
Mhm.
right off Tiananmen Square.
Okay.
And it was the same weekend that Putin was in town,
Ah.
and he was staying at the embassy. But the Russian, the lower level Russian embassy people were staying in this hotel. And when the Russians would ask for something from the hotel staff would look at them and say, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'd shrug their shoulders, shake their head, and look the other way. And the Russians would try Russian, then they'd try English maybe, or perhaps some Chinese. And the Chinese would just look at them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would come up right behind them and say something like, we'd like to get a tour to the Great Wall. They'd say, "No problem." We can get that
In
right
English.
now." In English. And the Russians would turn around, they were just furious. And
Oh,
so
I'm sure they were.
the Chinese and the Russians do not like each other.
Yeah.
It was very apparent.
Well, that's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed it, not knowing what you just told me. Since they both have some version of the same system,
Yeah.
in theory.
Well, I think the Soviets were not very nice to people.
Yeah.
And
Well, that was part of what we picked up in Vilnius at Lithuania. And Poland, we were in Poland too, and they just all sorts of stories about Stalin, and the post-Stalin era was not that great an improvement, I guess.
my to circle way to the beginning, when I was in junior high school, I read a series of books by a guy named Arthur Ransom. And they're children's books about sailing. But he was actually a spy for the Russians. I mean, for spy for the English in Russia. And he wrote a book on sailing in the Baltics, on the Baltic countries. It's very, very, well, if you like sailing, it's a good book. If you don't care about sailing.
My eagerness to be a sailor of that sort, sailboat, was cut short when I was a teenager. I was crewing on a friend's sailboat on Lake Washington in Seattle, and we got becalmed. And we sat out there along with everybody else in this race for about 3 or 4 hours. And I got to the thinking that maybe if I could turn that key and just go back in port, I'd be happy.
We had, when I was in law school, I sailed out of the Tacoma Yacht Club.
Okay.
And so I raced on this sailboat. There were about 6 of us on the boat, and one of the people on the boat we called the old guy. He was probably in his 50s.
Yeah.
But
well, to
us,
someone in the 20s, that's old.
But he had grown up sailing there and knew everything. And local knowledge is really important sailing in Puget Sound.
Yeah.
So we would start off, and the wind would be dropping, just like you said. And he'd say, we need to get over by that shore. And we'd say, well, there's no wind there. And he'd say, there's no wind here. And it's going to get worse. Go over there. So we, all right. So the skipper would turn the boat, and we'd head over, and the sails are hanging limp, and we'd pick up a current. And so all of a sudden, we're moving ahead.
You're moving right along.
Everybody else is hanging behind us. And then, 10 minutes later, the guy would say, okay, we got to get out of here. We got to get back out in the main channel. Well, by now, everybody else has come in behind us, because they go, oh, we can do this. So they come in behind us, and he says, we got to leave. We got to get out. It's going to be bad. I say, oh, all right. We were right the first time. I guess you're right now. So we go back out into the main channel away from the shore. And then there was an eddy, and everybody stopped. So we'd sail away from them, and it was always very interesting.
He knew about the eddy, or he knew what was changing, or whatever, I guess.
I mean,
and
it's like every kind of profession or activity. If you have some experience and you're willing to listen to the guy with experience, you can do well.
Yeah. Well, maybe on that point,
Yeah.
we should answer the call of the cooks. But I want to thank you, Denny, for being part of today's conversation for our oral history, and thanking you. I'm thanking you on behalf of myself, of course. I had the fun of coming down here from Olympia, Washington, to talk to you and a few other folks, and here in town. But I'm also thanking you on behalf of Michelle Wu and Frank Hodak and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the honor and privilege to be putting this history together.
Well, it's an honor for me to be included in this.
Thank you.
This profession has been wonderful to me, and I don't know how much I've given back.
You have an interesting story to tell, and that comes across very well in what I've been listening to. And you've been carrying the ball. I've been able to sort of sit over here behind the camera and loaf.
Well, I mean, I found it's been interesting. I hope that.
No, you covered the waterfront very well. We get back to that sailing business. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, anyway, take care with your travels and say hi to people on the way on your travels.
Thank you.